Good afternoon, everybody. I am Martin Richards from the Business Studies Department at UCCI, and I will be chairing this session. It would be nice to ask for your undivided attention, but I understand it's lunchtime. So at least I'll ask for most of your attention. Just some housekeeping matters before we get into this session. There are some persons who have indicated that they will be taking back strategies to their various countries, and what we'd like to do is to have a press release regarding these strategies that will be taken back. So we are asking you kindly to submit your strategies, the things you'll be implementing when you go back to your various countries. And if you'd be kind enough to send this to an email address, it is events@ucci.edu.ky. So all the strategies that you intend to take back to your various countries, if you'd be kind enough to send those to events@ucci.edu.ky. And if you would just put your names on those emails, your names, your titles, and the comments, and you just put conference strategies. Okay, so the address one more time is events@ucci.edu.ky. In addition to that, we're asking you kindly that when you're leaving, if you were to return your name tags, so when you're leaving sometime today, if you would be kind enough to just leave your name tags, whether at the front or any of the conference committee members, you could leave those name tags with. Okay, for the next few minutes, we'll be looking at a very important topic, which is a corruption-free government for Jamaica, a how-to manual for the Contractor General's Office with implications for the region. And to make this very important presentation, we have Mr. Dirk Harrison, the Contractor General of Jamaica since March 2013. He holds a BA degree in history and an LLB degree from the University of the West Indies. In addition, he holds the Certificate of Legal Education designation from the Norman Manley Law School, Mona. As an independent anti-corruption commission of the Contractor General of Jamaica, Mr. Harrison is entrusted with the exclusive statutory authority on behalf of Parliament to monitor and investigate award and termination of all government contracts, licenses, and permits, with a view of ensuring probity, propriety, accountability, competition, transparency in Jamaica public sector procurement, contract award, and licensing processes. He is vested with the power of a judge of the Supreme Court of Jamaica and has extensive statutory powers of investigation, inquiry, search, discovery, and subpoena. Prior to his appointment as Contractor General, Mr. Harrison, who is a trained Caribbean lawyer, was employed as a Senior Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, with special responsibility for the Anti-Corruption Unit. He was also head of the Coroners and Environmental Units and one of Jamaican's experts for the implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption Review Mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome at this time Mr. Dirk Harrison.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed. I must admit that when I was made aware of this topic on which I am to speak today, it caused me to wonder whether, unbeknown to me, I was gifted with a magic potion, or even worse, that a rumor of sorts was crafted to mislead all of us into thinking that I'm a miracle worker. But for the benefit of those who the topic may have escaped, I intend to share with you some of my thoughts as it relates to a corruption-free government for Jamaica. And I just ask you to crave my indulgence for a moment. I'll begin by saying today that a corruption-free government, and by extension, a nation, is a fallacy, a false notion which should be debunked. While we hope to someday live in such a nation, for now we have the arduous task of doing whatever we can within our powers to confront corruption at all levels. I'll just continue in the meantime. It is true, ladies and gentlemen, that corruption and the perception of corruption, they are viewed differently wherever you go. What is indisputable, however, is that corruption is real, and the war against corruption has to be waged to aid this and future generations in living in a world where connections, or what is considered the right incentive, are of no value when conducting businesses. Ideally, what we all desire is a system where all parties have a fair chance to get things done. A few months ago, in December 2013, to be exact, the then present World Bank Group President, Jim Yong Kim, he stated and declared, in the developing world, corruption is public enemy number one. He went on to lament to the extent to which people within these nations are deprived of varying forms of opportunities owing to the actions of corrupt public officials and private sector interests alike. He highlighted some of the ill effects of corruption by stating that every dollar that a corrupt official or a corrupt business person puts in their pocket is a dollar stolen from a pregnant woman who needs health care, or from a girl or a boy who deserves an education, or from communities that need water, roads, and schools. This is a fact, ladies and gentlemen, that we must all grapple with in our respective territories. Funds invested in corrupt undertakings could be better spent on the development of that country, and by extension, the people of that country. While we're busy doing this introspection, it's interesting to note the EU anti-corruption report, which spoke of 28 member states, and it spoke of the findings by the Commission. The Commissioner stated, corruption erodes trust in public institutions and in democracy. It undermines our internal market. It hampers foreign investment. It costs taxpayers millions. And in many cases, it helps organized crime groups do their dirty work. The Commissioner stated that in spite of new legislations being adopted, new institutions being set up, and national anti-corruption strategies being adopted in many member states, the results were not sufficient. She stated emphatically that they were simply not doing enough. That is true for all member states, she continued. Ladies and gentlemen, when one looks at the figures which have been represented I forgive you. Please just bear with me. I'm still waiting on the projection on the screen. That's why I keep turning to my side to await it.
You won't need the remote, right? You just have to use a key.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so just use the arrow.
Thank you. This one is Excuse me. Excuse me. Oh, okay. Forgive me. Let me start again. Forgive me. I think I shared a slide with Joseph, who presented earlier. And I start with a corruption-free government. But I shall highlight another aspect of this pictorial. It speaks to one day our country will be corruption-free. Which tense is it? Future impossible tense. I think it speaks importantly to distrust of politicians or distrust of persons in public office. And unfortunately, it speaks to almost a sense of hopelessness. But in terms of the views that we have on corruption, corruption and the perception of corruption are viewed differently wherever you go. What is indisputable, ladies and gentlemen, is that corruption is real and that the war against corruption has to be waged. What is also true, ladies and gentlemen, is that whatever we desire, whatever system we want, a value system, it must be a system which affords a fair and equal chance of getting things done for all persons. In the developing world, corruption is public enemy number one. As has been stated by the World Bank president, as I indicated earlier, it's very important that we understand and appreciate the significance of what is being said here, because we'll appreciate at the end of the day the effect, the correlating effect that corruption or its perception will have on particular institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, most places where corruption occurs, they are really poor countries. Poor, some Latin American, some Caribbean, and even some countries in the Caribbean who are not poor, but who show no signs of it actually occurring. The seminal importance then of us addressing it cannot be understated. As I stated earlier, the EU Anti-Corruption Report 2014, published by the Commission in February of this year, it looked at corruption and the perception of corruption within 28 states, member states. Importantly, that Eurobarometer, the survey indicated that 76% of Europeans think corruption is widespread. More than 56% think that the level of corruption in their country has increased over the past 3 years. And 1 out of 12 Europeans think or say that they have experienced or witnessed a case of corruption in the past year. The Commissioner continued and stated importantly that corruption erodes trust in public institutions and in democracy. It undermines our internal market, it hampers foreign investment. It costs taxpayers millions, and in many cases it helps organized crime groups do their dirty work. Interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, the pictorial that appears once again on the screen, the challenge is to fight corruption. On the one hand, we have remedial math, 2 plus 2 is 4. Remedial English, the cat on the chair. We have remedial ethics. Bribes are always, A, always, B, sometimes, C, never acceptable. I start in this context to indicate what I think are the challenges to the fight against corruption, not just in the Caribbean, but globally. And I ask us to see the lighter side of this very important topic which is before us. The challenges as we seek to fight corruption I would humbly submit the lack of necessary and effective legislation, the absence of the Office of the Contractor General being able to enforce sanctions where procedural breaches occur in relation to perceived corruption or governance issues, the lack of political will to effect meaningful change, and this lack of political will speaks on both sides of the fence, both political parties. A further challenge we face in the fight against corruption is a mistrust of authority, and it speaks to some of the slides we saw earlier. Hence, there's an unwillingness to report acts or suspicion of corruption. There's a perception of political interference, which is real, and reported acts of corruption committed by those in authority are something, certainly, that we want to disabuse our minds from, but it exists. It possibly reinforces the public's perception of public officials being corrupt. Ladies and gentlemen, I think in this all, and I think I would congratulate and thank Mr. Greg Christie. He gave me a wonderful platform from which to start my job 1 year ago. But I think if you look at successive reports of the Office of the Contractor General, ideally, it is always a rush to complete projects bypassing the rules. The very persons who made the rules, the politicians, they always want to bypass the very rules that they created. Instead of changing the rules that they created, they bypass the same rules that they created. Another challenge, we believe, to the fight against corruption, we have multiple agencies dealing with different forms of corruption and not sharing information as a rule. There is, in my view, gross selfishness on the part of many agencies in Jamaica who seek to pursue their own goal and refuse to act as a team. When one considers what has been described as an effect of corruption, we must look at what has been said by the then United Nations Secretary General, that corruption destroys opportunities and creates rampant inequalities. It undermines human rights and good governance, stifles economic growth, and distorts markets. That cannot be understood. I'm sorry. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my summary of how to challenge the perception of corruption or actual corruption is one, a need to change the mindset of our people, the mindset of the politicians, and the mindset of our people. The need to pursue education, the need to call what I said calls a spade, but I think importantly, I think Mr. Christie mentioned it earlier, we seem to be thinking alike. But I think importantly, another way of putting that is that we also could rely on the rule of law and ensure that a person is not found guilty. You're innocent until proven guilty. I say this in the sense that when you call a spade, importantly, you may accuse somebody of doing some wrong, but importantly, we need to allow due process to continue. We cannot find someone guilty until a person has faced the rigors of a system. It would be unfair. Training must be pursued. Presently, 10 of 20 officers of the Office of the Contractor General have gone and done the basic detective training course at the Twickenham Park Jamaica Constabulary Force. They're being trained as investigators. I think this is one direction which we should move to train our investigators. 10 other persons are to pursue this course, and 10 have already gone. Additionally, we believe that sound investigation should be pursued. Sound investigation which leads to sound convictions. Oftentimes, the criticism is out there in the public domain that because of the absence of convictions, because of the absence of a high conviction rate, it means evidently that no work is being done. I think I shared yesterday with a number of my colleagues that my view is, as a former prosecutor, if I had 100 cases before me and I disposed of 90 by offering no evidence, it did not mean that I was a bad prosecutor. It didn't mean that because my conviction rate was 10%, I had failed. What I thought I was doing was being a fair person, a minister of justice. So when we compare the American scenario of a rate of success as it relates to prosecutions, I think this is something we should look at carefully and not necessarily attach success to convictions in all circumstances. Now, when we seek to effect change, ladies and gentlemen, we must educate the people on acceptable norms and introduce legislation to counter and prosecute corruption. It is a necessary action. And when I spoke earlier of education, I have sought, through meeting with Professor Monroe, a number of other stakeholders in Jamaica, to have a meeting in terms of having a child from every high school in Jamaica meeting on a day or two for a national anti-corruption conference. One child from each high school, a child from each primary school, we sit and talk about corruption and values. I don't think it has ever been done before. I have spoken to him with a view to us doing it and getting the necessary funding, because I think it's a necessary, an absolute necessary that we need to undertake. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of crafting a model, in terms of a how-to-do manual, the punishment must fit the crime. It means that obviously the sentences that appear in our books, on our books, they need to be revised. It is absolutely inadequate. We need to also train law enforcement agents, not just train investigators. We need to train law enforcement agents. We need to train judges. We need to train all persons who are part of the process. And I think Professor Monroe spoke of that, and also NIA has been doing quite a bit of that. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very important point. We need to activate the moral compass, which obviously does not exist. I would make bold to say that oftentimes it seems that persons don't actually have the moral authority to rule. But to suggest that to them would be thought to be offensive and abrasive. However, it is the fact. And as Mr. Christie would say, it's calling a spade a spade. Now, the moral authority to rule must be a must. Nepotism or a conflict of interest, they are not crimes, but they're inherently wrong. About a week ago, I sat with a minister of government, and I heard the comment being made that, but nepotism is not a crime. And I think it comes after the recent report of the Office of the Contractor General, where a minister of government was accused of nepotistic acts. But I think this is part of the moral compass we need to speak about, because it is not perceived or it's not actually a crime. They believe that you can do it, nobody can say anything to you about it, and you can go by and everything is okay. Apparently, either the compass is not working, it is not in place, or one does not actually know that it exists. Ladies and gentlemen, the growing intolerance of corruption in our society is such that I think it is at the seams. It is at the seams about to burst. I think now is the time that we all should come together as stakeholders. And I heard my colleague ask earlier as to why it is that we think that we'll be able to engage CARICOM members. But I think we rather should not think how we will address the problem. Let's just do it. When we get there, we deal with the problem. Let's not think of the obstacle before we get there. Let us try to achieve it first, rather than think of the obstacle. Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at what has happened across the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, in my humble opinion, we are bursting at the seams. In my humble opinion, what is happening may happen to us one day. And I give you a few examples. This is a demonstration against government policies and corruption in the Ukraine. Those are thousands of people who demonstrated. This is a demonstration in Venezuela, thousands of persons demonstrating against government policies and corruption. This is a demonstration in Brazil, once again demonstrating against government policies and corruption. I just pause here to say that until we take it seriously, we are going to realize that something is going to happen overnight to us, to our countries, and it is going to be frightening. This is a demonstration in Egypt, demonstration of the people in respect of issues of governance. Very important and one which we must seriously consider. Thailand, once again, a repeat of what is being said. Ladies and gentlemen, the only correlating factor I could find was the riots in relation to the West Indies cricket team throughout the Caribbean. That seems to be the only symbolic act, which seems to be somewhat similar to these demonstrations we have had worldwide. But importantly, it speaks to a turning point. And I think we appreciate the political culture. We must understand what's happening in our societies, because I believe and predict that we are at a turning point, and I think we need to act very quickly. I just swiftly go through. I think Professor Monroe mentioned earlier, LAPOP indicated through their survey, which was a 2012 survey, which they released earlier last year. It speaks about Jamaica, it speaks about the perception of corruption. It speaks about the numerous countries, Trinidad, Guyana, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica. And Jamaica rests in the middle, and it speaks obviously about how much work needs to be done. Now, more importantly, it speaks also about the perception of corruption in the Caribbean. Interestingly, the list is not as exhaustive as it could be, but importantly, I commend to you these graphs because it makes interesting reading for us to understand the perception of corruption in the Caribbean when one looks at it in conjunction with what is happening worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, how do we fix the problem? There is no one-size-fits-all strategy that will suit all countries in the region. The cultural norms and values would have to be considered for each country. We must first acknowledge that there's a problem. Most countries, I believe, well, let me speak for Jamaica, we don't readily accept that there's a problem. We must identify the problem in all its forms, then commit to taking the necessary steps to address it. We must fight corruption with a clear and complete strategy, which is easily understood. The necessary resources need to be identified and committed to the cause. Now, having identified the problem, the question is, how do we bring it under control? The next logical step, ladies and gentlemen, to my mind, would be to disabuse our minds from the talk shops that we have. And I trust, as I've seen for the last 2 days, this session is not a talk shop, and I trust at the end of the day we won't say it is. This has been happening too much. We meet all the time, we talk, nothing is done. Ladies and gentlemen, the matter of corruption is more a moral issue than it is a legal one. The task for us to determine how we redirect, reprogram the moral compasses within our people. We have to get through to our people and have them change their mindsets and appreciate that in embracing anti-corruption efforts, that they have more to lose than to be gained in the long run. A level playing field must be maintained, especially as it relates to the treatment of local contractors and foreign contractors. In Jamaica, there is a disparity. Foreign contractors are allowed certain time spans which is not afforded to local contractors. It is unfair. We cannot forsake investment for our own people. Need to fix the problem of corruption in the region. We need to stop blaming the politicians and the system, which many insist they created. Whether they created it or not is no longer the issue. The question is, how do we fix it? Corruption is no longer a political issue. Interestingly, the said politicians who created these rules, some of them complain about it. Politicians, interestingly, too, have an important role to play in the changing of the mindset of people as the masses look to them for direction. But I wait on the day. I presently have 3 children, and I wait on their children to hear the day of a politician who will point on one of his own and say he's guilty of corruption. I wait to see that day. What we find is their silence. But it is perceived that it is happening, but nobody says anything. The role, therefore, of the Office of the Contractor General, we believe, is fundamental. A measuring stick must be created to redefine the campaign against corruption. And as I said earlier, the conviction rate, in my humble view, must always be a guide. However, it cannot be the ultimate test. Further in fixing this problem, as I indicated earlier, a massive public education program. Further, we must adopt an approach that the perception and the reality that the big man in the jacket and tie is subject to a different set of rules and sanctions from the common man. We must not keep on moving the goalposts to satisfy public officials, persons in the private sector, and persons who wear the tie and the jacket. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll just move on quickly as time is going. But it speaks about what we all know about Transparency International, that corruption thrives where temptation means permissiveness, where institutional checks on power are missing, where decision-making is opaque, where civil society is empowered. It's therefore important to establish control mechanisms and systemic hurdles to prevent people from abusing their power. Jamaica, ladies and gentlemen, in my own words, we have been living in the norm of Jamaica, no problem. To me, I say Jamaica, enough problems. How are we going to fix it? Ladies and gentlemen, we need to get the business done. Someone is guaranteed to get a benefit because of somebody they know. Persons are often helped out. We need to stop that. We need to prevent it. Ladies and gentlemen, as I touch on a small area, some issues which affect the perception of corruption in Jamaica as it relates to procurement. It speaks importantly, one, to time and cost overruns, subcontracting, and emergency contracting. There are areas which are interesting and one which we must focus on. In relation to emergency contracting, it's amazing in this day and age in Jamaica. We are presently conducting investigations. Emergency contracts, 2 years after the contract being issued, the work has not yet started. And one wonders how that could ever be an emergency contract. What happens each time the government hides behind this notion of wanting to issue emergency contracts. So we have launched an inquiry into all emergency contracts throughout the public sector. Ladies and gentlemen, subcontracting, and another interesting one. What has happened in Jamaica, and I'm sure it probably happens elsewhere, we have subcontracting, we have subcontracting. There's no way to tell, there's no way to trace the money. What happens when you ask the person who is on the road, I have no documents, I just handed out cash. You have no paper trail. And something that I think has been mentioned earlier, Mr. Christie has spoken of it many years, that what is important is for us to legislate subcontracting throughout our procurement systems. Therefore, the mandate of the Office of the Contractor General is one that is very important. I shared with you, I have become just like Mr. Christie, the cartoons, they seem to love us. And this is what they said in relation to me when I just started. Ladies and gentlemen, this is really my pledge, and we really want the support of all persons in order for us to be successful. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to consider the OCG does not have powers to stop a contract already in progress or to prosecute offending parties where impropriety or irregularity exists. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of a manual, we need that power. The OCG functions therefore as a mere ombudsman. We must ensure that we fix our local procurement system, ladies and gentlemen, before we agree to a regional procurement system. I think we need to fix backyard first before we go externally to seek to join with others. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Office of the Contractor General moves forward, we seek to communicate with the public via several platforms: our annual report, our special investigation reports, our media releases, letters to the media, our tweets. But importantly, as a way forward, the office needs to ensure that what we say, if it's important, we are heard. I just invite you and commend to you our website if you need any more information in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen all these slides, they appear on Google, and I think importantly, as we look at the context within which corruption thrives, it's important that we need to appreciate the task ahead. We know where the problems are. The problem is that we don't fix them. I must commend the media. When one looks at even the reports of NIAL, also the Center for Governance, we see importantly the effect the media has had on the corruption drive. They have highlighted corruption cases, thus keeping alive the issue of corruption in the public's eye is very important. If we don't talk about it, if we don't speak about it, people won't think they need to change. Ladies and gentlemen, I recommend, as I wrap up, empowering an independent anti-corruption agency with prosecutorial powers and the independence to initiate investigations to prosecute. Ladies and gentlemen, importantly, I ask you to look carefully at my words. I, unfortunately, am not now for a single anti-corruption agency, but I am for an independent anti-corruption agency with powers. I believe at this time that the proposed bill that is before Parliament, it is an attempt to quiet the Office of the Contractor General. It is an attempt to centralize power. It is an attempt to take away our power. And I must say at this stage, I am not for the single anti-corruption agency at this time. I would propose giving more power to the Office of the Contractor General. I would propose, if they wish, to join the Integrity Commission and the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption. That is fine. But I am not at this time for the single anti-corruption agency, having seen the bill that they laid in Parliament last week. As we move forward in terms of Vision 2030, as we move forward to formulate a national development plan, we must address all sectors of society and see how each may be developed, commingled, in keeping with a set primary goal, which is to be date sensitive. We need to set long and short-term goals, ladies and gentlemen, and seek to accomplish these. We need to conduct risk assessments to ensure that what we're doing and implementing makes sense. We need to periodically revise regulations, rules, laws. We need to plug the problems. We need continually to speak about the problems which exist. Ladies and gentlemen, we need importantly to continue, as we have done at the OCG, have an impropriety hotline. We also have an online feature for persons to make anonymous reports. We need to ensure that we continually audit policies and procedures within public institutions. To identify areas of vulnerability, I recommend change where necessary. We need to ensure that we recommend that we conduct audits, in respect of pre-contract and post-contract stages, and also during the implementation of the contracts. We cannot leave anything unturned. Ladies and gentlemen, we must move towards an e-procurement platform. It is a way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to train. We need to train each other. We need to train the trainer. We also need to ensure that the training is passed on. It's all well and good for us to talk about procurement. It's all well and good for us to talk about our issues and speak about our problems in our nations, but how do we actually teach people to investigate? Do we teach them how to prosecute? Do we teach them, the judges, how to consider the appropriate laws? We just speak here about problems, but we're not speaking and helping the persons who are practitioners to be better persons. Ladies and gentlemen, as I wrap up, but this PowerPoint will be available. The collective mindset of our nation needs to be changed. We have to somehow get in the heads of our people to let them choose to be moral crusaders, insisting on fair play, integrity, and leadership, accountability, honesty, and demanding change for the collective good of the nation and by extension the region. These are some other things that we need to consider. Though there are some of them are not criminal offenses, there are things in respect to the moral compass that we need to look at. Ladies and gentlemen, as I close, I share with you importantly two passages. And importantly, it says, transparency is about shedding light on rules, plans, processes, and actions. It is knowing why, how, what, and how much. Transparency ensures that public officials, civil servants, managers, board members, and businessmen act visibly and understandably and report on their activities. And it means that the general public can hold them to account. It is the surest way of guarding against corruption and helps increase trust in the people and institutions on which our futures depend. And finally, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, as we move towards the implementation of a system, whether locally or regionally, we must consider importantly this quotation, which is on the United Nations Convention Against Corruption website. A framework should not be confused with a blueprint. There is no single model of reform. Instead, leadership in each country must determine priorities and the appropriate sequences of steps towards implementation. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harrison. And my apology, in the interest of time, we won't be able to have any additional questions, but you will agree with me that it was a very thought-provoking presentation. And just to summarize quickly the main points, that we need to have a change in mindset. We need to ensure that the persons who are involved in law enforcement are properly trained and that the laws are effective. Thanks again for being such a good audience, and I see you at the other session. Thank you.